China and Saudi Arabia have joined forces in the oil industry in recent years. Some people worry that this means they are moving away from depending on the United States. They have come one step closer to detaching themselves from what transpired in the East this week. While everybody is centered around the Russia-Ukraine struggle, Saudi Arabia and China keep on arranging against the US. But before we analyze the latest news from the Middle East, we must first understand where this oil counterplan originated. For many years, China has been buying oil from Saudi Arabia. Their friendship has become closer in recent times. In 2020, Saudi Arabia was still the main supplier of crude oil to China. They sold more than 15% of all the crude oil that China imported. In 2020, China bought in excess of 83 million tons of crude oil from Saudi Arabia. This sum is 1.9% higher than whatever they purchased the prior year, as expressed by China's General Administration of Customs. The rising usage of the Chinese yuan in oil trading is one of the most significant developments in the China-Saudi Arabia alliance. The two countries signed a memorandum of agreement in March 2021 to collaborate on oil and gas production, storage, and trading. The agreement includes the use of the yuan for oil trading, which could dramatically reduce reliance on the US dollar in oil transactions. China wants to use its own money, called the yuan, more in trade with other countries. This would make China less reliant on the US dollar and make the yuan more important worldwide. China has been empowering the utilization of the yuan in exchange with different countries and has managed numerous nations to make it simpler to involve the yuan in global exchange. Recent collaborations demonstrate that the Chinese-sponsored reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia in early March caught American diplomats off guard. They are diverted from the Middle East by Russia's conflict in Ukraine and tensions with China over Taiwan. For the time being, the Biden administration had abandoned its quest to license an Iranian nuclear weapon and was now focused on a second disgrace. The endeavor to persuade the Saudis to boost their oil output was unsuccessful. MBS's reluctance demonstrates how low Biden, who threatened to make Saudi Arabia a pariah state, regards Saudi Arabia. MBS's terms for restoring relations with Israel did emerge from those discussions. The U.S. should aid Saudi Arabia in establishing nuclear reactors rather than fight its nuclear weapons development. The Saudis want such bombs because they are concerned about Iran's nuclear development. Since the U.S., Saudi Arabia's memorable benefactor has neglected to contain Iran. The Saudis are currently shifting focus over to China to do as such. China, similar to India, requires reliable supplies of oil and gas from the Middle East and Russia. The Chinese understand that a Sunni-Shia conflict that blocks the Persian Gulf would be disastrous for business. It is not yet clear, assuming the Iranian system will finish its commitment to accommodate Saudi Arabia and rein in its regional terrorism campaign. Regardless, rival external powers are filling the void left by America's slow withdrawal from the Arab Middle East. It started with Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Now it's China's turn. A multipolar world system is rapidly taking shape. MBS is positioning Saudi Arabia as a pivot state between the United States and China. Saudi Arabia wishes to enjoy the best of both worlds, as Germany currently has. While America guarantees Germany's security and has recently pressed it to purchase American-made armaments, Germany's export economy sees its future in China, not the United States. 10% of German exports are sold in the United States, compared to 6.9% and rising in China. The term most important export market for Saudi's oil is correct, but misleading. In 2022, the United States purchased 14% of Saudi Arabia's exports. Add the value of Saudi Arabia's next largest export markets, all of which are in Asia, and the picture changes. Japan at 13%, China at 12%, South Korea at 10%, India at 8% accounts for 43% of Saudi exports, more than double the value of shipments to the United States. Asia's need will only increase. Saudi Arabia's economic turnaround has already taken place. The Saudis became observers in the Chinese-sponsored Shanghai Cooperation Organization last week. They will then become active members. Negotiations with China to sell oil in Chinese yuan rather than U.S. currency are ongoing. The petrodollar's days are numbered. Israel is heading in the same direction. Americans meet Israel's most advanced defense demands, and the United States remains Israel's largest export market, 28% of all Israeli exports in 2022, worth $18.7 billion. In 2022, Israel's second and third greatest export markets will be China, 7.1%, and India, 6%, followed by Hong Kong, 2.5%, South Korea, 2%, Singapore, 1.8%, and Japan, 1.7%. Israel's Asian exports exceed 20%. Israel's Asian exports will total $14.5 billion in 2021. These figures, like Saudi exports to Asia, will only climb in the future. Before the decade's over, Asia, not the US, is supposed to be Israel's primary market. The strategic repercussions of the US-Israel organization are undeniable. To keep up with its strategic associations with Russia, Israel has done its most extreme to avoid the Ukraine struggle. In the event that the US and China progress forward with their impact course, Israel will be expecting the same thing. In the East, is a new Russia-China-India bloc forming? A potentially significant meeting in New Delhi last week went mostly ignored in the West. Nikolai Patrushev, secretary of Russia's Supreme Security Board, visited India's top state leader Narendra Modi in a confidential, uninvolved Shanghai Cooperation Organization SCO meeting. Details on what was talked about are famously scarce in the public realm, but securing a meeting with Modi is a difficult process, and the conversation had a compelling context. Since the start of the Ukraine war, Russia's economy has relied heavily on trade ties with India and China to sustain its war effort. Because of the extraordinary severity of the West's sanctions against Moscow, Russia's President Vladimir Putin was forced to create a parallel economy to avoid dollar transactions and maintain those ties. As a result of the invasion, Russia's trade with China in the Chinese yuan increased by an astounding 80 times. During a gathering with China's leader Xi Jinping last month, Putin referenced a more drawn-out term intended to depend on the yuan as its favored money. We are supportive of involving the Chinese yuan for settlements among Russia and nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In the meantime, in New Delhi, the representative top of Russia's State Duma, the lower place of parliament, proposed a unified digital currency led by India, China, and Russia. Russia's latest foreign policy concept statement identified India and China as its closest friends last week. From Moscow's perspective, all of this seems reasonable. The problem for Putin is that India still sees China suspiciously, owing to lengthy border skirmishes, and it's highly doubtful that New Delhi would be willing to collaborate with Beijing to develop a parallel economy free of the dollar just yet. Following deadly border clashes in 2020, India cracked down on various Chinese smartphone apps and investors. It began several tax evasion investigations against Chinese companies last year. Modi's protectionist enthusiasm for strengthening domestic manufacturing is also responsible for the broader trend of economic decoupling. However, none of this implies that India is unwilling to challenge the dollar's global dominance. Concerns about Western hegemony are more pervasive in India's strategic culture than most in Washington realize, and the West's extensive use of economic sanctions has unnerved many in New Delhi over the years. Last year, India's central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, allowed rupee trade, allowing for stronger ties with sanctioned countries. But to maintain his parallel economy, Putin will need to find a way to reduce tensions on the Himalayan border between Beijing and New Delhi. Many are unconvinced that Putin can persuade Xi to do so. The Chinese now hold the balance of power and the lopsided alliance. In any case, as China focuses on greater awards on the world stage, the boundary with India is rapidly turning into a reference in China's international desires. China has been securing itself as an essential option in contrast to the US for a long time, from Ukraine to the Pacific and the Middle East. As tensions rise around Taiwan, Beijing is shifting its focus to preparing for any economic retaliation from the West. At some time, India will have to be included in this plan. Due to increased oil purchases since the invasion, India's imports from Russia have increased by 400% in the last fiscal year. Russia is currently India's fourth biggest trade partner, and it is still growing. It was the 7th largest just a few months ago. It's no surprise then that Patrushev was accompanied on his trip by the chairman of Rosneft, Russia's state-owned oil business, who signed an agreement to boost supply with the Indian Oil Corporation. It is safe to conclude that the oil sector relationship between China and Saudi Arabia is a big development with far-reaching ramifications for the Middle East and the global energy market. The growing economic and geopolitical links between these two countries may result in a shift in the regional balance of power, weakening the U.S. position in the Middle East. Furthermore, as China becomes more involved in the global oil market, it may have implications for the U.S. shale oil industry and alter the global oil trade dynamics. The long-term consequences of this collaboration are unknown, but it is apparent that it constitutes a huge shift in the global energy environment. As China's demand for oil grows, it is increasingly attempting to ensure its energy supplies by collaborating with key oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia. As a result, this collaboration is likely to impact the future of the global energy market and have long-term geopolitical ramifications.